Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, August 28th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today will be a high of 84.4 degrees and a low of 72.3. A relatively mild late summer day, perfect for enjoying the outdoors before the heat really kicks in. Coming up on Alex's News, we'll dive into the significant question of whether race-conscious redistricting can withstand its current challenge before the Supreme Court. Then, we'll turn our attention to the United States public health system, examining the underlying causes behind the considerable upheaval it is currently experiencing. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with a seismic shift in Louisiana's ongoing redistricting saga, a legal battle that could redraw the very fabric of American electoral politics. For the latest on this crucial development, we turn to our national affairs reporter, Ethan. Ethan, Louisiana took a very notable step yesterday, effectively abandoning its own map and urging the Supreme Court to take a radical new stance. What can you tell us?
That is right, Grace. On August 27, 2025, Louisiana made a stunning move, essentially telling the U.S. Supreme Court that it wants out of the current system of race-conscious redistricting. The state formally abandoned its defense of the political map it previously enacted, a map that actually led to the election of 2 black members of Congress. Instead, Louisiana now urges the Supreme Court to prohibit any consideration of race when drawing these electoral district lines. As NBC News and the Associated Press have reported, this move is widely seen by voting rights experts as a direct attack on the Voting Rights Act of 1965, or the VRA.
A direct attack sounds incredibly serious. Can you elaborate on the state's reasoning, Ethan? What is Attorney General Elizabeth Murrell saying?
Absolutely, Grace. Attorney General Elizabeth Murrell has been quite vocal, stating, quote, "race-based redistricting is fundamentally contrary to our Constitution," unquote. She went on to say that the state, quote, "wants out of this abhorrent system of racial discrimination," unquote. This position, if adopted by the conservative-dominated Supreme Court, could profoundly reshape American electoral politics and significantly diminish minority representation nationwide. UCLA law professor Richard Hassan, as highlighted by NBC News, has warned that such a ruling could lead to a, quote, "whiter and less representative Congress," unquote. It is a really high-stakes play by Louisiana.
That's quite a gambit. This dispute has been ongoing for some time, hasn't it? Give us a quick recap of how we got to this point.
You are right, Grace. This has been a 3-year journey, a real redistricting drama that has certainly taken shape over time. It originated after the 2020 census. The state's initial Republican-controlled legislature drew a map in 2022 with only 1 majority black district out of 6, despite black residents comprising approximately 1/3 of Louisiana's population. Civil rights advocates and black voters challenged this map, arguing it diluted their voting strength in violation of Section 2 of the VRA. A federal court and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with them.
And then the Supreme Court stepped in, leading to a new map, correct?
Precisely. The Supreme Court intervened twice in this legal fight. Faced with a court order, the Louisiana legislature enacted a new map known as SB 8 in January 2024. This new map created a second majority black district, which indeed led to the election of Cleo Fields, a black Democrat, in the 2024 elections. However, that is not where the story ends. White Louisiana voters then filed a separate lawsuit, Calais versus Landry, challenging this new map. They claimed it was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, arguing race was the predominant factor in drawing that second black majority district.
So essentially, the state was forced to draw a map with 2 black majority districts, but now it is arguing that creating those very districts is unconstitutional? That sounds like a constitutional conundrum. And the Supreme Court is hearing this again?
Indeed, it is quite the turn, Grace. The Supreme Court first heard arguments in Louisiana versus Calais * in March 2025, and some conservative justices expressed skepticism about the map. Then, in a rare move, the court ordered a re-argument scheduled for October 15, 2025. That is just 48 days from today. This procedural rarity often signals a potential major shift in legal precedent, similar to the 2010 Citizens United decision, as noted by NBC News and the Sun Sentinel. The justices have specifically asked parties to address whether the state's intentional creation of a second majority-minority congressional district violates the 14th or 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution.
48 days. That makes the stakes incredibly high. Louisiana's new argument seems to hinge on what they call a colorblind interpretation of the Constitution. What exactly does that mean in this context?
It means a lot, Grace, and it could color us all concerned. Louisiana's argument, as reported by Democracy Docket, explicitly seeks a complete prohibition on considering race in redistricting. They are drawing parallels to the Supreme Court's 2023 Students for Fair Admissions rulings, which struck down race-conscious college admissions policies. The state contends that, quote, race-based redistricting is categorically unconstitutional for all the reasons race-based admissions programs are likewise unconstitutional, unquote. This colorblind constitutional interpretation takes inspiration from Justice John Marshall Harlan's famous dissent in Plessy v. Ferguson back in 1896, where he declared, quote, our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens, unquote, as referenced by the Harlan Institute.
And how do civil rights advocates counter this colorblind argument, particularly given the historical context of the 14th and 15th Amendments?
Civil rights advocates, including the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund and the ACLU, are expected to present robust counterarguments, Grace. They will assert that the 14th and 15th Amendments, along with the VRA, were intentionally designed to be race-conscious to remedy historical discrimination and ensure equal political opportunity. They argue that a colorblind standard here would betray the amendment's original purpose. The 14th Amendment, for example, was enacted after the Civil War to establish African Americans as equal citizens and counteract discriminatory black codes, as explained by the National Constitution Center. The 15th Amendment explicitly prohibited denying the right to vote based on race.
So they are arguing that ignoring race, in this case, would ignore the very history these amendments sought to address.
Exactly, Grace. Advocates emphasize that despite those amendments, Southern states circumvented them for nearly a century through tactics like poll taxes, literacy tests, and racial gerrymandering. They argue that ignoring this history by adopting a colorblind interpretation would undermine the very purpose of eradicating racial subjugation and achieving racial justice, as argued by Democracy Docket. They also point to the Supreme Court's 2023 decision in Allen v. Milligan, an Alabama case. In that 5-4 ruling, the court affirmed the continued vitality of Section 2 of the VRA, even requiring Alabama to create an additional majority-minority district. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh sided with the liberal justices in that decision, as highlighted by NBC News and the Sun Sentinel. This decision directly supports the legality of considering race in redistricting when necessary to comply with the VRA.
It sounds like Louisiana is trying to throw out established precedent. What are the potential nationwide implications if the Supreme Court sides with Louisiana on this?
The implications, Grace, would be profound and nationwide. Voting rights experts, including Richard Hasen, warn that such a ruling could severely weaken the VRA, making it nearly impossible for states to draw districts that comply with the landmark civil rights law, as reported by NBC News and the Election Law blog. This could lead to a substantial reduction in the number of minority representatives elected to Congress and state legislatures, with existing majority-minority districts becoming vulnerable to challenges. Southern states, with their history of discrimination and reliance on the VRA, would likely experience the most significant disruption and profound shifts in political representation, as detailed by the NAACP LDF and PBS. This case truly could redefine political power in America.
Ethan, thank you for breaking down this incredibly complex and significant story for us. We appreciate your insights and will be following this closely. That was our national affairs reporter, Ethan. This is story 1 of 2 this morning. Welcome back. This is our second story of the morning, and it's a big one regarding a leadership upheaval at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC. We have reporter Chloe here to break down these significant developments for us. Chloe, the news from the CDC has been quite startling. Can you bring us up to speed on the departure of Director Susan Menarez?
Grace, it has indeed been a tumultuous time. Susan Menarez, who only just became the 21st director of the CDC on July 31, 2025, was terminated yesterday, August 27, 2025. According to reporting from the Seattle Times and Star Tribune, this makes her the shortest-serving director in the agency's 79-year history. She was also the first CDC director to undergo Senate confirmation, a result of a 2023 law.
That is an incredibly swift exit. What reasons have been given for her firing?
Well, there are conflicting accounts, Grace. White House spokesman Kush Desai stated that Menarez was fired because she was, quote, not aligned with President Donald Trump's agenda and refused to resign, unquote. However, her lawyers, Mark Zaid and Abby David Lowell, issued a starkly different statement, asserting she was, quote, targeted for standing up for science and refusing to rubber stamp unscientific, reckless directives, unquote. They also claim that Menarez had not officially been notified of her termination by the president, arguing that only the president could remove a Senate-confirmed appointee, as reported by sources including AlJazeera.com and APnews.com. Her brief tenure was also marked by a shooting incident outside CDC headquarters on August 8th.
That shooting incident sounds harrowing. Beyond Director Menarez's departure, we're hearing about a wave of resignations from other top leaders. What can you tell us about those?
Yes, her firing coincided with the resignations of at least 4 other top agency leaders this week, signaling deep internal dissent over the direction of public health policy, according to the Seattle Times and Star Tribune. Among them was Dr. Deborah Howery, the CDC's deputy director and chief medical officer. She cited the crippling effects of planned budget cuts, reorganization, and firings, lamenting that, quote, the science at CDC should never be censored or subject to political pauses or interpretations, unquote. Dr. Dimitar Daskalakis, who headed the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, also resigned. He explicitly criticized Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for, quote, remaking the ACIP, unquote, by replacing its members with vaccine skeptics, effectively putting, quote, people of dubious intent and more dubious scientific rigor in charge of recommending vaccine policy, unquote. A CIP, for those unfamiliar, is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, a key independent body that provides guidance on vaccine use.
It sounds like a deep division, with some experts calling it an, quote, absolute disaster, unquote, and the CDC, quote, being decapitated, unquote, according to Dr. Robert Steinbrook of Public Citizen. Now, this upheaval at the CDC also comes amidst a major shift in COVID-19 vaccine policy from the FDA. How do these new guidelines differ?
That's right, Grace. Adding to the upheaval, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, approved updated COVID-19 shots from Pfizer, Moderna, and Novavax yesterday, August 27, 2025, for the upcoming fall and winter season. But this comes with significant new limitations on eligibility for some children and adults, as reported by PBS NewsHour. The new vaccines target the LP.8.1 subvariant, and the updated federal guidance is a stark departure from previous recommendations that advocated for yearly vaccinations for everyone aged 6 months and older.
So who is now eligible under these new, more restrictive guidelines?
For adults, the updated vaccines are approved for all seniors aged 65 and older. However, for younger adults, vaccination is now limited to those with at least one high-risk health condition, such as asthma, obesity, or diabetes. Healthy adults under 65 will now need to consult a healthcare provider before receiving the shot. For children, Pfizer's vaccine is no longer authorized for children under 5, as its emergency authorization for that age group was revoked. Moderna's vaccine remains available for children as young as 6 months, but only for those with at least one serious health condition. These changes, championed by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and FDA Commissioner Marty Makary, signal a heightened skepticism regarding the ongoing risks of COVID-19. Secretary Kennedy Jr. also announced the rescission of emergency use authorizations, or EUAs, for COVID-19 vaccines, which he claims were previously used to justify mandates. EUAs are typically granted during public health emergencies to allow unapproved medical products to be used when no adequate and approved alternatives are available.
This certainly seems to be a major pivot in federal health strategy. What is the expected impact of these new restrictions on vaccine access and coverage for Americans?
This new approach is certainly throwing a wrench into vaccine access, Grace. Health Secretary Kennedy Jr. previously fired every member of the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, earlier this year, and their replacements have not yet made new recommendations. This is a critical issue because 19 states have laws that only permit pharmacists to administer ACIP-recommended vaccines. Without those new ACIP recommendations, pharmacies in these states may be unable to provide shots even to those who fit the FDA's narrowed criteria, and some pharmacists may be hesitant to vaccinate individuals outside the approved range, according to PBS NewsHour. Insurance coverage also faces uncertainty, although Medicare will cover shots for those 65 and older. For everyone else, coverage is, quote, still evolving, unquote. This means, without insurance, the updated shots could cost $150 or more. It appears these new guidelines are giving vaccine access a real shot in the foot, making a once straightforward process much more complicated.
Indeed, Chloe, a confusing landscape to navigate for sure. Thank you for making sense of these complex changes for us this morning.
My pleasure, Grace.
Our reporting today drew from several sources, including the Seattle Times, Star Tribune, AlJazeera.com, APnews.com, CBC.ca, TheGuardian.com, Yahoo.com, NYMAG.com, GovExec.com, WYPR.org, MyMotherlode.com, PostGazette.com, and PBS NewsHour. Here are some other headlines. Casting a chill over diplomatic relations, Denmark has summoned the top U.S. diplomat in the country after reports allege that American citizens with ties to the Trump administration are running a covert influence campaign in Greenland. Danish media claims at least 3 U.S. nationals have been compiling lists of Greenlandic citizens, cultivating relationships with politicians, and pushing narratives that paint Denmark in a negative light, all in an effort to foster a secession movement. The alleged goal is to pave the way for the United States to acquire the strategically vital Arctic island, an idea President Trump has repeatedly floated. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen called the alleged interference totally unacceptable, giving the U.S. a diplomatic cold shoulder. The U.S. State Department confirmed the meeting, but noted the government does not control the actions of private citizens. Meanwhile, in the nation's capital, the Trump administration is getting management of the historic Union Station back on track. The Department of Transportation is assuming control from Amtrak, citing the station's deteriorating condition and safety concerns. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said the DOT could manage the property better, bring in more revenue, and address issues like homelessness. However, this move also appears to have derailed a long-planned $10 billion expansion project for the station. Critics see the takeover as another assertion of federal power over the overwhelmingly Democratic city, following the recent deployment of the National Guard to address what the president has termed a, quote, crime emergency. On Wall Street, Reverend Al Sharpton is leading a protest today with a message that's non-negotiable. Thousands are marching through the financial district to protest what they call a corporate and political assault on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The march, organized on the 62nd anniversary of the March on Washington, is a direct response to the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle DEI programs. Sharpton says he's bringing the fight to the doorstep of the bulls and bears, calling DEI the civil rights fight of our generation. Across the globe, a powerful trio of leaders is set to gather in Beijing. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will make his first visit to China in 6 years to attend a massive military parade next week. The parade commemorates the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. In a significant display of unity, Russian President Vladimir Putin will also be in attendance, joining Kim and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Analysts see the gathering as a collective show of defiance against pressure from the United States, with the leaders marching in lockstep, both literally and figuratively. And finally, a special delivery of cross-border confusion has created a postal impasse. Mexico's postal service has temporarily suspended all parcel shipments to the United States. The halt comes amid widespread uncertainty over the end of the U.S. de minimis tariff exemption, which allowed packages valued under $800 to enter the country duty-free. With that exemption expiring Friday and no clear rules on what new tariffs will apply, Mexico, along with the European Union, Japan, and others, has pressed pause on mail. The White House is reportedly considering several new tariff schemes, but the lack of clarity has effectively stamped out shipments for now, impacting billions of dollars in e-commerce and leaving individuals unable to send even a simple letter. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.